Democrats are taking this country into the toilet.
Ever been with an archangel before?
Why are you just licking your balls? Go stop the crime.
Yay, a Michael Bay movie was relevant.
I will not acknowledge that.
Hey, come join our group. But if you do, you can never leave.
Yeah, I wouldn't open with that.
Good evening and welcome to the Church of Awesome.
The church to end all churches.
I'm conducting today. I am the Cardinal Imam Spencer, son of Hagar.
Peace be upon him.
Presiding today is the Archangel Michael.
Yeah.
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 Also along for the ride, we have the Demi-Pope Chris and Bill. Today we will be discussing...
Dun dun dun. Cults.
Leading our discussion will be the Demi-Pope.
So yeah, this is a big one. First of all, let's discuss what do you guys think of when you hear the word cult?
Kool-Aid.
Yeah, living in a compound.
Nikes. Tracksuits. Comets.
Jelly beans.
I'm Gary.
Jim Carrey.
Hoarding weapons.
Yeah, it's weird. The word cult has been used as basically just a pejorative term to mean any group that I disagree with. If they're... Because we're going to talk about a lot of aspects of cults and a lot of methods that cults use, the things that kind of define them. And a lot of them are really broad and can apply to a lot of groups. Because, I mean, any group where you're trying to exercise some sort of form of control over people, they're going to use some of these cult-like things. It doesn't necessarily make them a cult. But the word cult becomes hard to define because how many of those things do you have to have before we can label you a cult? That's not to say that there's just this, everything's in a gray area either, so we can't say that certain things are definitely cults and definitely bad, because you've got things like the People's Temple in Jonestown. That's where we get the drink the Kool-Aid thing for, even though it wasn't actually Kool-Aid, it was Flavor Aid. And I bet...
I'll bet Kool-Aid.
I bet Kool-Aid's pretty pissed about that one.
I don't know, man. Any publicity's good publicity.
Yeah.
You never hear of anybody buying Flavor Aid.
Yeah.
Yeah, not nearly as much pissed off as Flavory would be because,
Like, what the fuck?
I didn't even get the name recognition.
Yeah. But, I think they should use that as their next advertising campaign. Drink the Kool-Aid.
The official sponsor of the Jonestown cult.
But for those of you who don't know much information about the Jonestown cult, it was basically a cult around biblical socialism, which just turned into straight up Soviet sympathizers leaving the country because they wanted to set up a Soviet style communist system in Guyana. And the biblical aspect of it kind of went away, but the charismatic leader part of it stayed very, very firm. But it ended up with 909 people dead. That's actually the largest loss of American life, not caused by natural disaster, until 9/11. So it was a huge disaster. Should we go into that? Like,
I was going to say, what about the Civil War?
Well, that's
a lot of loss of American lives.
I mean, that's...
I'm just saying.
Well, that's wars. I mean,
yeah.
We're talking about, like, peacetime things.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously. But... Do you want me to go into it? Kind of some?
I think so.
All right. Mm-hmm. I'll tell the short version. So Jim Jones, who is the after which Jonestown was named, he was a communist, and he was trying to kind of get people into the communist movement in kind of the 60s ish, 70s ish something, and he actually gained a lot of popularity and was contributing in political campaigns and stuff. And he had a lot of allies, in politics. And but his paranoia and his ideology actually ended up isolating him from a lot of people, because he started to go what can only be described as totally batshit nuts. But he still had all these followers, and so they all just went batshit nuts along with him. And it ended with this compound in Guyana there were accusations that people were being held there against their will, or that there were human rights violations. And so a congressman went down there to check it out. Representative Ryan from, I think, Northern California. And he went and investigated the scene, and he was like, okay, it's kind of culty here, but it's no big deal. There were 5 or 10 people that wanted to leave, and he said, okay, these people could come with me, and everybody else, you just be fine. But as he was leaving, Jim Jones is like, he's going to tell everybody that we're bad. His paranoia just kind of kicked in, and so he's like, we got to get those people, the defectors, and we have to make sure that nobody hears about this. And so they ambushed them at the runway when they were about to leave, and they killed a whole bunch of people, including the congressman, who was the only congressman ever to have been killed in the line of duty. And so after that, he's like, well, when news of this gets out, then we're just totally fucked. And so that's when they did the ritualistic suicide thing, and they signed over all of their money and possessions to the Soviets. They actually, drew up documents before they killed themselves and said, like, I leave everything to the Communist Party of Russia. And
so the mass suicide was more of an escaping responsibility for their actions rather than a part of their actual dogma.
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting. It's like, oh, we were still going to do that anyway because God told us to.
A lot of times we think of cults as being primarily religious. This one, kind of your paragon example, was more of a political cult than anything. And really the reason that they all died was because of the leader of the cult was too paranoid, and he felt like he had to kill himself, and everybody else just had to go along with it because they were his followers. So it's like, we would rather die than live in a capitalist pig economy, blah, blah, blah.
Now, the word cult, is that short for culture? Is it supposed to be like some counterculture or subculture?
No, and originally it was just meant like sect or subculture. Mm-hmm. But obviously the word has gained this negative connotation.
Right. The connotative meaning is
just because it becomes attached to groups like this, mm-hmm. where you just see this absolute horror going on, where 909 people commit suicide all at once, and it's just totally disturbing. Then there are other cults like the Manson family mm-hmm. cult that if you guys haven't heard about it, that was the Helter Skelter movement, where they were trying to incite a race riot. Basically, Charles Manson had this premonition, which is often the case, just like, oh, I have this ideal that needs to be realized. And he said that this race war is coming, and the blacks and whites are going to fight against each other, and the blacks are going to win. And so what he did was that he went around doing random acts of violence, trying to incite a race war. So he went around killing prominent white people in horrific ways, and trying to pin it on black people so that they would start fighting.
It was like, was this a self-fulfilling prophecy? I had to fulfill my own prophecy.
Yeah, exactly. I remember that he said, it's like, we have to show the blacks how to do it. And you're like that's a weird thing to say.
Yeah, and didn't he eventually later carve a swastika into his forehead? Like, that's what he has now.
Yeah, he's not a normal individual.
Yeah, you don't say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cult leaders generally aren't. Usually they are self-deluded. Sometimes you get these ones that are just trying to profit mm-hmm. off of things, but the more harmful ones, the ones that really run off the rails, are the ones that are led by psychos already.
Yeah. I actually saw an interview a while ago about one of the guys that was in the Manson family, and he said just straight into the camera, totally serious, said, I thought he was Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. I was like, I don't know if that guy was crazy or if Manson was actually telling people that he was the Lord come back again.
It's entirely possible, because that's a pretty common pattern. You get the same thing with the Branch Davidians in Waco, mm-hmm. where David Koresh thought that he was the second coming of Jesus, and everybody else thought the same. And that's a pretty classic religious cult. That was a splinter group of a splinter group, because you have the Seventh-day Adventists, mm-hmm. and then the splinter group was the Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, and then this is the Branch Davidians of the Seventh-day Adventists. So you get these splinter, but it's led by a charismatic individual who thought that he was the second coming of Jesus, and it basically took all the Seventh-day Adventist teachings, just to the extreme, and we all know that did not end well. The compound was...
Tell me a story.
And they all lived miserably ever after. But
About 10 minutes.
the compound was, attacked by ATF, FBI, and I think CIA.
Yeah, that was a fucking disaster.
Yeah, and that was actually, you probably know more about that than I do.
It's been a while though. You've researched it recently, so
Yeah, but anyway, it did not end good.
yeah.
Another popular cult story is the Heaven's Gate cult, just because that one's so bizarre.
Yeah, it's my favorite.
Yeah,
And recent memory.
yeah, and it's pretty recent because that was what 95, something like that.
No, more recent than that.
No,
Like
it wasn't
late
more recent.
90s. No.
I think it was 95. I could have written it in my notes, but I didn't. But Heaven's Gate was a kind of a melding of science fiction, UFO stuff, Christianity, and New Age mysticism. So they... And actually, there's a lot of parallels between that and like Scientology, because Scientology kind of has that same... kind of that same mix, not the Christian aspect, but the New Age and the sci-fi, where they believe in this. And in Heaven's Gate, it was very much the Star Trek universe. Like everything about it, when you're like, yeah, that's very Star Trek. But they believed that they had to. They were one of these purity cults where they have to purify themselves, be absolutely perfect, so you'll be ready to be advanced to the next level. And they never talked about how you advance to the next level was killing yourself, because they believed that there was some sort of spiritual energy contained within their bodies, and their body was kind of a prison that they needed to escape. That's kind of a common thing in a lot of it's just kind of in the religious outlook, because the body has limitations.
Well, it's that whole the mind is willing but the body is weak. That it's that our physical bodies are a handicap to spiritual maturity.
Yeah, well, because we're not capable of being perfect, because we get tired.
Yeah, because we're not. Because God didn't make us that way.
And sometimes we have to do things like take a shit, and that's dirty.
Or even have sex.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Or eat food, which is unclean. Sometimes we want Twinkies. But they were all about, purifying themselves, and that's where we get the, you said the dressing in tracksuits and white tennis shoes. That's just another one of the things. We'll talk about a lot of these things, and you'll see how these fit into some of these cults, but they dressed all the same, they behaved all the same, they all had like the same haircut. Not all the men, but almost all of the men were castrated, just to so that there would be so that they were all completely the same, homogenous.
So there's no fighting over dick sizes.
Yeah, if you saw the Family Guy episode when Meg joins the cult, that they pretty much based it off of the Heaven's Gate guys.
Yeah, because again, you said that's the recent memory one, and that one, there's a lot of visible signs of that one. That's kind of one of the scary things about cults, is our misconceptions about them, that we think it's as obvious as that one, and that it's like, who could ever be fooled by that nonsense? But there are other ones.
There really was a spaceship behind that comment.
Yeah, it reminds me actually of firearms. That I've said for a long time that it's the ignorance of how firearms work that is very, very dangerous. A lot of people think that guns will just go off randomly. Oh, I can't touch it or even look at it sideways. Otherwise, they'll just go off and kill everyone. Like, okay, there's a lot to learn about how guns work, and they don't just randomly go off.
Yeah, generally speaking, ignorance about a topic is the most dangerous when you're talking about things, when you're playing with fire like this. Cults can be very powerful, obviously, because we can see the things that they can do to individuals. That they can completely strip people of their individuality and make them do things that they would never otherwise do. But we also need to make sure that we are aware of the tactics, which is why I'm going to talk about them at length, and also not be so bold as to say that we could never be taken in by some of these tactics, because some of these tactics are just hardwired into human nature. A lot of these things are ways that any group gets control over any individual, for good or for ill. There's a whole bunch of other people that have been accused of cult-like behavior, like Maoists, Scientologists, Mormons, creationists, the Tea Party, global warming deniers, but we won't go into that. There's kind of 4 basic types of cults. You've got your religious, which I put basically all religions to some degree will use a lot of these tactics. Then you have your commercial cults, like multi-level marketing, things like Amway, Mona V, Mary Kay. You've got corporate brainwashing also fits into the corporate culture of an environment. A lot of times uses these cult-like tactics.
Team building exercise 99.
Yeah, like team building exercises. A lot of times they're using the same kind of things.
Yeah, it always makes me laugh when it's like, in the office, we're going to celebrate diversity today, but not really because we want you to be a bunch of homogenized fuckwads.
Yeah.
And do what we
But
say.
you can see like there's corporate cultures where they'll just like the tobacco companies. You had all of these lawyers testifying that nicotine was not addictive, and probably they ended up convincing themselves that they believed it, and probably the corporate culture around there was one of denying this obvious fact. And you can do the same thing with a lot of times Apple computers have this following that's very much like a cult.
Look,
We'll
I'm going to get
incur
rid of
some
the
wrath
iPhone.
from that one.
Yeah.
And also under commercial cults, I put the mob, because when you have organized crime, that kind of fits into the mold.
Yep,
as
unquestioned
well.
leader, and you could easily die at any moment.
There's self-help cults like Alcoholics Anonymous is, and again, I'm not saying that any of these are or are not cults, but I'm just saying that they will use some of the things. It all depends on where you draw the line, whether or not you're calling something a cult. Scientology is also kind of in this thing that they're big into the self-help movement. And I would say the Landmark Education Forum, if you've ever heard of them, they're a big self-help thing, but they use a lot of cult-like tactics.
Like Scientology and Jehovah's Witnesses also, like, whenever you practice super shunning of people who leave or outside people.
Oh yeah, we'll get into that.
Yeah, that's very clear indicator.
Shana.
Shun.
And last but not least, political cults. Like political parties will use a lot of these things for influence. Splinter groups, conspiracy theorists, global warming deniers, where you have controlling of individual thought patterns and stuff like that for political means. I mean, obviously, like the Nazis would fit into there as well.
This may be a weird time to interject this question, but when I think of a cult, I think of the term false imprisonment, which is basically the restriction on a person's right to move about freely. Like, if there's a point where you can't leave whenever you want to, then to me, that is true blue, scary, bad cult.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because if you're a member of the Tea Party, it's like, okay, maybe these guys are batshit and I'm going to leave. Like, but if it's like you're inside a compound and it's protected by guards and stuff and you can't leave, that's a way different thing.
But there's going to be differential pressure, basically, because it'll go all the way to the extreme of you can't leave, we'll kill you. But then there's shades of subtlety in between that and if you leave, we'll all shun you. And you'll lose your entire social support group, and or we'll make you feel guilty if you leave, or if you leave, you can't get into heaven, or if you leave, you're leaving the one true movement, and
if you're so conditioned that you've become fully dependent on their doctrine, then leaving it is going to have a heavy toll on you.
Exactly. A lot of their methods are trying to supplant your identity and your social support group with this new one, so that you can't leave it, because if you leave, you lose who you are as a person, because everything that you used to define yourself is based in this cult, and so if you leave, then that's a huge thing. You have to basically become a new person. It's tactics of cults. This is what we were talking about. That I'm just going to go down a big list, and we're going to go into pretty good depth about a lot of this stuff. These are the things, and I'll list them first, and then we'll go over them. That the more of these that a group exercises, and to what extent they exercise them, is what can kind of tell us how cult-like they are.
It's a continuum. Right?
Exactly. We can, we should probably make a scale of like, rate this 1 to 10, rate this 1 to 10.
It's it reminds me of like if you're trying to teach your kid to not go home with strangers, their kid's idea of what a bad guy looks like, it's usually pretty obvious, like, oh, he's got,
an eye patch and a scar.
Basically looks like the Hamburglar.
yeah, but there's plenty of innocent, normal looking guys who are also predators that they also have to be aware of. So if you're not educated about this and what the reality of things, then you could be kidnapped and pulled into a car without even realizing it.
And we often see that groups will start at a low level of some of these things and then progress into a higher level of them. Like they'll start with you can leave anytime you want, and then before you know it, you can't leave. So
because nobody's going to convince anybody to join their cult if it's like, hey, come join our group, but if you do, you can never leave.
Yeah, I wouldn't open with that.
Yeah. In fact, cults never open with that kind of stuff. There's always a degree of deception, which is the first thing. Deception, ding.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm going to just go down Actually, some of these won't make sense until I explain them, so I'll just go through them. So cults must engage in deception because there are things that they have to hide because they would scare people away on the face of them. If you said, hey, we're all going to wear identical tracksuits, and they go, why?
They
That's
said,
kind of
hey,
weird.
and May 21st, we're all going to kill ourselves.
Yeah. Then that would put you off to them a bit. So
You're like on a first date saying, oh, I still wet the bed.
yes, you gotta wait a while before you let that one
At
go.
least a couple dates, but before she wakes up to the wet spot.
Yeah. So they have to lead with stuff that's strong. There's usually a strong PR and presentation element of it. Things need to be presented in such a way as to hide the inconvenient truths that would, scare people away. Milk before meat, as they say. Bring them in slowly so they don't get the shock of how strange or wrong something doesn't hit them all at once. You have to kind of gradually, like they say, the frog in the pot of water, you got to turn up the heat gradually.
Yeah.
So that the shock of the change in temperature doesn't scare them away. If you feel that someone's trying to be very presentational with you, that would be kind of a warning sign that they're trying to. If it seems very polished and very PR, then that's a good sign that they're engaging in some cult-like behavior of trying to hide some stuff that they'll reveal to you later in a slow and easy way, so that you have a better chance of accepting it.
It's like when somebody tries to get you into Amway, for example. They come to you with this whole big thing and this big presentation all laid out for them. Everything to tell you about all this money you can make.
Mm-hmm. Another thing is if you're trying to talk to a member of this group and you say, hey, yeah, tell me about it. And if instead of talking to you, they try and set up an appointment for you to meet with a group that will do a presentation for you. So like, hey, we're going to have these, these professional presenters visit you, or we're going to come to one of our meetings. Things like that.
Well, here's another bad sign. If you ask someone about that, so tell me about it, and you can kind of immediately tell that their eyes kind of roll back and they start reciting from a pamphlet they read a bunch of times, something's probably up. That they're not actually talking to you. They're just, you push the play button on a pre-recorded machine.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. Another one of the tactics is exclusivism. So members need to believe that there's no other option, that this is the best, whatever kind of group it is. So if it's like a political group, this is the best we have. Or if it's a church, they will say, this is the one true church. Any other church I go to will not be the same. This could be different from like a mainstream religion. If you go from one building to another, like if you're like, hey, I was going to the Los Angeles chapter, but I'm moving now, I'm going to go to the Santa Ana chapter.
Yeah.
Then they'll be okay, fine, go ahead.
Yeah, as long as you believe in Jesus. Yeah.
Yeah, as long as you believe kind of the overarching stuff. But these splinter groups will say it's like, no, you can't go to this other group. They're not as good as us. We're the one true church. Outside of this church, there is no salvation / success / whatever.
Yeah, only we are the authorized servants of the Lord.
Exactly. So if they feel like they can go to a different group, then they have the power. But if they feel like they have no other option, then you have the power as the cult leader. Fear and intimidation. Leaders will lead by fear and guilt. So the leader obviously has unquestionable authority. That's kind of part of the whole cult thing. He will never debate ideas. Instead, he will attack and shame people that question him. If questioned, instead of addressing the argument, then he'll just say like, "Oh, it pains me that you don't understand this." Like that kind of thing, where you talk down to them, you shame them in front of everybody, so that people know not to question you, and you say like, "I know because of this higher authority that I have." You need to exert that to be the cult leader. I just realized that we're just telling people how to start cults, so. Little disclaimer, but don't do that.
Don't do that, okay? It's bad, okay?
But yeah, unquestionable authorities, that's a big red flag, especially when they're not amenable to any sort of, like, if they're above the law, for example. Yeah, that's always another big red flag.
My ways are higher than your ways.
Yeah.
By the way, I'll say here, every time someone like compiles a list of what it means to be a cult, they're usually very, very poorly done. So I look forward to your good one. They're usually either really vague or things like they like, oh, I hate my church, and these are things that they do that I don't like, so therefore that's a cult. Like,
what I noticed is actually a lot of these, when I was doing all this this cult research, a lot of the anti-cult stuff is authored by churches.
Yeah, it's talking about why Islam's a cult. And
no, it's just like why these other branches of Christianity are cults and not ours. Said without even the slightest bit of irony.
Right.
It was just staggering just to see this stuff. I'm like, really?
Mm-hmm. But what we need is something that's easy to remember. Like, I always think of false imprisonment, unquestioned leader, insider versus outsider, us versus them. These kind of cliche mnemonic devices are ones that, like, when I hear something, a red flag goes, unquestioned leader.
Actually, do you want to hear my list right now? Should I blow my wad right now?
You definitely should.
All right. Here are the signs. Absolute authority with no accountability and a monopoly on truth.
Nice.
Number 2, no tolerance for critical inquiry. Number 3, unreasonable fear of the outside world, impending doom / persecution, us versus them mentality. Number 4, deserters are always wrong, evil, and the worst kind of enemy, so that they have to be shunned.
Yeah, I mean, they're the Judas.
Yeah. And departure from the group is always traumatic. So they need to make it difficult to leave and traumatic for the individual to do so. Number 5, followers can never be good enough. There's a black and white world, and there's a demand for purity, an unreasonable demand for purity. Number 6, influence with shame, guilt, and peer pressure. Number 7, lack of individuality, making sure the group is homogenous. Number 8, fostering dependency, social, economic, and spiritual. So that all of this stuff, the social pressures, your social support group is all within this group. You're depending on them in an economic way because you're donating a lot of your money to them, and then they provide so there's usually a socialist aspect to it.
I was like, oh, God's giving you 90%.
Yeah. And spiritual dependency, saying just, your soul is only safe with us, kind of stuff. Number 9, claims of exalted status, that the group is better than any other group. Says, you are special, you are better than those people out there. That's another part of the us versus them mentality. Number 10, troubling ideologies deemed too sacred to talk about. If you start going like, well, why is this? Then we can't talk about it. It's so sacred.
Yeah. So does God have a wife? Oh, it's
too sacred to talk about. It's
yeah.
An ends justify the means mentality. To say that, like you can get people to do illegal or immoral things if you just say, look, this we know this is wrong, but we have to do this in order for this greater good to come about. And that's an easy to understand, easy to access human thing. And say like, hey, look, we have to do this bad thing so that this greater thing can happen. That's why we fight in wars and stuff like that. You realize that sometimes you have to do some bad things to get some good outcomes. So they play off of that. And number 12, finally, new language, jargon, and loaded words. So you get people, a lot of terms that only people on the inside will understand. That helps reinforce the us versus them mentality and the esotericness of the group. And then loaded words, you can have these words that will end discussions or immediately label somebody as evil. Like if you're in a socialist group, then you can just call anybody capitalist, and that is such a loaded word to that group that automatically they know, oh, this is the evil we are fighting.
Yeah, he is an apostate.
Exactly. That's another. You can label the people that have left and shun them and say like, oh yeah. And it doesn't matter what he's saying. You can attack the individual and say like, well, he says this and this. Yeah, but he's just an apostate. It's like, oh yeah, typical liberal bullshit. You know.
Yeah.
Or whatever. You just have these loaded words.
Right.
So that's the list. And I'll post this on the website as well. You can go to churchofawesome.com. I'll probably make a whole special section for this thing that we can kind of update, because I don't think this is comprehensive. This is the best I could come up with. And it seemed pretty complete based on the research that I was doing. But if anybody has any other ideas, then
Yeah, I'd love to see a bunch of comments from people saying like, "Oh, what about this? What about this?"
yeah. So feel free to help us out with this list, because that was one thing that I found, and that you mentioned before, that a lot of the lists that I found online were not all that helpful and were really skewed kind of one way or the other, saying like, this is how you get away from that cult and come over to ours, you know.
Wait, I had something for this. Drink up, bitches. So today, I'm saying goodbye to an old friend. It's been a good couple of months. This dram I'm drinking right now is the last out of a bottle of Glengoyne 17-year Highland single malt Scotch whiskey. And this is a goodie and not too expensive. It's about $50 here in the whiskey-friendly state of California. And for a 17, that's pretty reasonable.
Absolutely.
And it's really classic Highland. You know, that sweetness, but without the over sherriedness of a space side. No real peat to it. It's a good one. I'd probably replace it with something else from the Glengoyne line, but
I'm confident you will love again.
yeah.
And I'm about halfway into this one that I think I've done before on the show. The Balvenie Caribbean Cask 14-year. It's absolutely fantastic. It's a space side, so it's got a little bit of that sherry characteristic, and Balvenie particularly has a lot of that sherried, intensely sherried, ness to it. But this is aged in a rum cask as well, partially. So it gets a lot of sweetness, and that kind of mellows out the sherry with some more of that molassesy kind of taste to it. But absolutely fantastic. If you can find that, this is my favorite of all the Balvenies that I've had.
Well, today I'm on call again, so sue me. I am drinking I'm communing with the spirit of the V8 10-year, also aged in oak casks.
I think that might be too old to drink.
Yeah. Low sodium, new look, same great taste, original 100%
Oh, you got the low
vegetable
sodium
juice.
shit? That shit's awful.
It's just really not all that much different.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of people
it's
think
awful.
that. I was gonna say I don't think a lot of people are fans of V8.
Oh,
I like V8 though.
V8 is awesome.
Yeah. Relationship control. This is an awesome one, because there's my favorite phrase from this entire thing is this one. Love bombing.
Love bombing.
Which is just such an awesome way of describing what this is. So you get people that you're trying to convince to join your cult, right? So what you do is you make sure that as soon as they walk in the door, everyone is uber friendly to them and they're just instant friends. You you shower them with love and affection so that they feel like, they're like, wow, I've never felt so accepted before.
Man,
and then only later on you realize that all of this attention and affection is contingent upon them being members of the cult. So it's, if you're not performing your duties or professing the belief the way that you need to be, that starts to go away.
So that's not just a Mormon thing?
No, that's in everything.
Because that's a very Mormon thing.
That is, and that's one thing that people say about Mormons when they first meet. They're like, oh, they're so nice.
Yeah.
It's like, well, yeah.
Because they're told to be. Because it helps convert people.
It's like, I'm sure that David Koresh was really nice when you first met him too.
Yeah. Entire Sunday school lessons devoted to how to welcome new people you haven't seen before and being outgoing and stuff.
And that's not to say there's anything wrong with just being nice to people, but
Sure.
the wrongness comes in when you say, hey, be nice to these people, but if they leave, then shun them. You know?
Yeah, and it wasn't exactly shunning, but just like, I don't give you a second thought if you're gone.
Yeah, the ability to dial back your love for somebody, dependent on their standing in this group.
Yeah, it makes it very apparent that it's artificial love.
Exactly. So love bombing.
Well, that reminds me, when I was in high school, you ever heard of the heart attack? I went outside and a bunch of girls had cut out a bunch of like hearts and pasted all over the front of my house. Like there was just dozens and dozens of them with neat little messages and, oh, you're so cute and you're so cool and all this fun. I'm like, yeah, nice little self-esteem boost there.
Yeah.
Like that's what I thought of when I heard the phrase love bomb.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've heard of people do that to like your car. You know, you go, there's a bunch of little hearts stuck to it, hopefully with not like some strange glue that's going to mess up your paint or something.
Right.
They're like, I love you. Fuck. Fuck you. You fucked up my car, you bitch.
Yeah. Could you love me a little bit more and not mess up my windshield?
I'll love you. But to have control over people's relationships in between each other that are not,
Is this like policing the marital bedroom?
I guess that could fit into that category. But it's, so they try and supplant your existing social structure with one that can be controlled by them. If you have a backup social structure, if you've got a family that cares about you, then if you leave the cult, which they make a difficult proposition on purpose, your family will be there to support you during that difficult time. But what they try to do is get you to cut all the ties with family, friends, other support groups, so that you're entirely dependent on this one, so that if you leave it, you're crushed. So that makes it just too hard to leave. And
not to steal a line, but it does get better. Like it's, they say time heals all wounds. I found that to be true because I was pretty devastated when I first left, and by now I'm very comfortable with myself, comfortable in my own skin. I'm not even like now I can look back and laugh at the silliness that I actually believe, but I took things very, very seriously.
Yeah.
Before.
Well, escaping from that cult mentality, it's always difficult. It's designed to be.
Yeah.
It's very difficult, but when you make it through that difficult time, it's always better because you have the freedom to be yourself. You have your individuality back. You can believe whatever you choose to believe. You don't have to, defend people or positions that you don't necessarily agree with.
Because you can kick the habit. You have the withdrawal symptoms. They will be there. You will have withdrawal symptoms, but I'm 42 days of being caffeine free, by the way.
Nice.
Oh yeah. I found that I've been mostly replacing it with beer, so I'm not losing the weight I thought I was going to. But it's funny because my taste buds have all changed. Like I'm craving things now, and things taste different to me, and I'm liking more beers. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, beer is generally an acquired taste.
Yeah. But because I miss the carbonation of the soda because I'm used to it from drinking so much. And then I'm like, hey, beer is awesome now.
Yeah, beer is awesome.
Because like when you start, it's like, oh, give me a rum and Coke, because Coke, and then that gets me messed up.
The sweetness is what you're craving.
But once you drop your sweetness floor, then like, hey, beer is really good.
Yeah, and you're drinking like salty things like V8 and semen.
You told me you never tell them about that.
Well, I was hanging out with Ben the other day. He told me all about it.
Yeah, I also wet the bed still.
We're far enough in a discussion that you can divulge that. Okay. Yeah. So the group will try to maximize time that you spend with them and minimize time spent with others. So that's particularly those that are critical of the group. If they have anybody, if you start telling people like, oh yeah, my parents don't really like that I come here, they will try and say, it's like, well, your parents are just trying to get in the way of your progress. You really shouldn't. They'll try and turn you against people that are actually looking out for your best interests. Saying it's just like, no, they're not looking out for your best interests like we are. You know, we know better than them.
It's important
because
that
you know
you-
we're the exalted members. We're the special select few of the one true church. And,
Yeah, it's important that you stick with your commitment to capoeira.
Yes, exactly.
We know what's best for you.
Yes. So yeah, that's relationship control. Then there's information control, which we could do an entire podcast episode on, because it's all about making sure the outside information, particularly critical information, is seen as taboo. You can label it with your charged language by saying it's like they're persecuting us. The apostates are persecuting us. They're anti whatever our group is. It's offensive. It's a conspiracy against us. It's pornographic. So it's controlling all of that and making sure that you have the propaganda machine running. And we'll probably do an entire episode on propaganda just because there's so much to say.
Yeah.
This just leads back to one of my favorite sayings that I've always said: the truth should stand up to scrutiny.
Exactly.
So,
amen.
yeah. Ramen. So a lot of times when you could say that to one of the people in these groups and say, the truth should stand up to scrutiny, and then they can just always justify their way around it by saying something like, well, this isn't the real truth. This is, you're coming from some weird thing. You're trying to trick me.
Just say your measurement system is flawed,
Yeah,
and they immediately hop right back into special pleading. You can't understand the things of God.
Yeah, and our leader has special understanding of this stuff. You should come to our meeting and see. It's just, it all ties together.
If only you saw what I saw, then yeah. I mean, that is kind of the heart of special pleading, is implying that you are unable to measure, the thing involved. So that's why
you're dependent on the group for that information as well, because you can't understand it yourself. Because even though you're a member of this elite group, they are only elite because they are receiving information and support from this one special leader, individual person.
The mothership.
Yes. So here's another really interesting one: the self-policing, self-deceiving aspect of cults. So members are encouraged to report the failings of others. The clearest example of this is Nazi Germany, where you had everyone was looking out to make sure that it's like, hey, report to the authority structure if you see your neighbors doing something wrong. And it's very much the same thing. It's just, I'm just looking out for your well-being. You seem to be drifting away from. I saw you hanging out with so and so. I saw you reading this, and I saw you have the members all policing each other and all suspicious of each other. But there's also the kind of the flip side of the coin of this is, since the ideal is perfect and unachievable, then each individual feels like they're not measuring up, but everyone else in the group is. So they feel like, oh, this, I just don't, I'm not as dedicated as all of these other people. I just need to try harder. It's, comparing yourself to this perfect ideal that you think everyone else is living up to. And you're just like, oh, I'm just not
because
quite
everybody's
there.
trying to project the perfection.
Exactly. Everyone's wearing this mask of, I'm so perfect.
And so all you see is everybody else acting perfect, and you don't see them,
Exactly.
masturbating.
Oh my God, I'm reminded of a absolutely perfect Joseph Smith quote. You probably heard this one before. If you teach people correct principles, they will govern themselves. That someone was asking, how do you keep your organization together? And it's like, well, it's not that tough, really.
Once you start the ball rolling. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's like, yeah, that's exactly what you're saying.
Kind of. This is still in a more authoritarian context, generally speaking. The self-policing thing, definitely. You find that a lot with groups, that they will gossip about each other. I don't want to be so sexist, but usually you have the women that are very much policing the group. The men tend to not care as much about that kind of stuff. They'll say like, I doubt your devotion, I'm going to punch you. But and the women will try and build a case, and they're the ones that are more likely to go up to the leadership and say like, so-and-so is doing this, or to just, align all of the guilting and shaming of the group against that one person that's not measuring up. But the self-deceiving thing, that's very much the emperor's new clothes thing. That's just like, everyone else can see the emperor's new clothes, but I can't. I just need to pretend like I do. And so since everyone's pretending, then no one can tell. The whole group looks perfect. They look like they're in unity with this one thing, but each one of them feels isolated. So also close friendships must be avoided because two people can form a bond of trust that can exceed that of the individual to the group. You can't have any threatening things. That's like we were talking about before with the Emperor's New Clothes, where as soon as one person tells one other person, you know, he's naked, right? Yeah. Then all of a sudden you get two people that they both know that
So it's
they're
not just
wrong.
me that's
it's not
saying a
just
naked
me.
dude. Yeah.
So, you know, it's like, it's not just me that thinks this is crazy. Okay. You know, but if you're isolated and going like, nah, this can't be right. You know, it's like, I see this, but this, like, I'm doing these things that don't seem right. But as soon as you tell someone else and you can share that, the things that you need to be afraid to do that for the cult to work. You need to make sure that, you know, I can't tell them, they'll tell the leader. If people are getting too close in a cult, then usually they'll split them up.
Really?
Yeah.
They actually did that in The Island. I'm assuming you never saw the Michael Bay movie, The Island.
I did. The last Michael Bay movie I ever saw. And it was only because Scarlett Johansson was in it.
Yeah, exactly. And because he was getting all chummy with Scarlett, which how can you resist? They got broken up. Like one of the officers came and said, "Oh, yeah, that's enough."
Exactly. And
Yay, a Michael Bay movie was relevant
I will not acknowledge that.
for a brief shining moment.
There's also time control. So there's many activities to keep people busy in the environment and to keep people tired.
Interesting. Yeah.
So a lot of times, especially with communist groups, you have work programs and farms that everybody's working very hard. That again keeps them with the perfection ideal. You need to be a hard worker to contribute to the group.
Two benefits to that I can think of. One, you have a rise in self-esteem when you're being productive. And two, when you're tired, you're more depressed, generally speaking. It makes you more submissive and docile.
Well, and it makes you more submissive is the big thing. And that you're just not going to be thinking about a whole lot of things when you're just tired.
Yeah. It's a lot hard to care about shit when you're exhausted.
Yeah, it's just kind of keep people, you know, staring 1 foot ahead of them, you know, just staring at their own feet instead of trying to look at the big picture and see how messed up things really are.
Well, the more you have to do, the less time you have to think.
Exactly.
And that's the last thing they want is independent thought.
Mm-hmm. So you want to keep people busy.
Yeah, we need you to go ahead and teach Sunday school and put the hymn books away and do this.
And work at the cannery and volunteer your time with these approved groups. Mm-hmm. And, you know, so it's making sure that people are in the environment with the people, with the group, thinking about the group, working hard, getting tired, going back home. We kept doing the same thing over again. So it's, you know, you're taking over that, and you're essentially creating a slave workforce as kind of a side benefit.
And what's the product, by the way? You keep like they can have farms and there's crops.
Mm-hmm. Or there's just volunteer work, like
like
Jehovah's Witnesses saying, like, you have to go every Saturday and knock doors and preach. Mm-hmm. And just there's a whole bunch of different activities, or they don't even have to be like work activities. They can be fun activities. It's like, hey, come here and, you know, socialize. We're gonna have a game night or a movie night or something like that.
Or we're gonna get together and jam.
Yeah, or just whatever. It's just any excuse to control their time, to bring them in, keep them there, and just make them more acculturated into this group. Mm-hmm. And the last one I'm just going to do, you know, use of mental manipulation and pressure sales techniques, which are so numerous that I won't even go into them. We can do a whole separate episode.
I would love
on
you to do
just that
on just
sales techniques.
Oh,
yeah.
Totally. Because there's just like,
well, I wouldn't know anything about that. Right.
Yeah, because, you know, there's things like, oh, this is the only place you can get the part from, or you have to make a decision right now. And, Oh, I look forward to that episode.
Because I remember I went to the Landmark Education Forum once because a friend roped me into it before I knew what it was. Oh. And it was at the end, it was a presentation, very presentational, and then at the end it was very high pressure sales. And you know, it's like, oh, that just makes me feel uncomfortable. And it's designed to say like, yeah, you know, participate in the group, just do it. And then you'll see, you know, the results you get. It'll be great.
And she was your best friend for like a week, and then
exactly. And then as soon as I didn't commit to that, then I haven't talked to her in years. So
yeah, that was a couple years ago, right?
Yeah, that was quite a few years ago. So to go over the warning signs list again: absolute authority with no accountability and a monopoly on truth, no tolerance for critical inquiry, unreasonable fear of the outside world with an us versus them mentality. Deserters are wrong, evil, the worst kind of enemy. Departure is traumatic. Followers can never be good enough. The world isn't black and white, and there's a demand for purity. Influence with shame, guilt, and peer pressure. Lack of individuality. Fostering dependency in social, economic, and spiritual ways. Claims of exalted status. Troubling ideologies deemed too sacred to talk about. Ends justify the means mentality. And new language with jargon and loaded words. So those things, I'll elaborate on. I'll do a big, huge bloggy thing, and then we can discuss all of those in more depth. But really, any of these things are. We talked about the extreme examples of a lot of these, but they can be much more subtle than what we've talked about. You can have. When we say no tolerance for critical inquiry, when I say that, you think of, well, what about that? Shut up! Or, just being just totally slammed down. But we were talking before about, there's just subtle things you can do to the environment to make it uncomfortable for questioning. That you may not realize that that's what's actually going on. Because obviously these cults want to hide this kind of stuff. They don't want you to realize that you can't ask questions. They want you to feel like you can ask questions, but that you don't have any questions.
Right. Part of going to public school, they say, is for socialization. So that's where you learn to sit up in your chair and don't interrupt the teacher while she's talking. And Sunday school often takes advantage of that, where, it's rude to interrupt. But, like in school, raise your hand and ask a question. That's what I did.
That's a good way to learn things, you'll find.
Yeah.
But there's like unreasonable fear of the outside world. You can see like doomsday cults are very much like that, saying just like the world's gonna end here. You got to join our cult quick. But that isn't the only form of that pressure. In political groups, they can say it's like, look, this, the Democrats are taking this country into the toilet. So, so it's. You're gonna use it as a sound bit. I just know it.
I'm gonna open with that.
Yeah. And then the deserters are always wrong and the worst kind of enemy. There's more subtle versions of that. It's not just the don't listen to him, he's an apostate. There can be more subtle versions of it.
I'm sorry, I'm 6.
Yeah. Stop laughing at me being funny.
Yeah.
How dare you? So the images that we have of cults, this mind control, automatons, they're trying to brainwash other people into becoming mindless zombies, and they take advantage of weaker individuals. That's generally not what we see in actual cults. It tends to be, the victims do tend to be at a bad point in their life, but they don't tend to be particularly weak or easily influenced individuals. It's, they tend to be just normal people that they just happen to have been caught at a time in their life when they were, let's say like getting over a drug abuse problem or getting out of a bad relationship, or somebody that they were really close to just died or something like that. That's, that they're feeling vulnerable, and so they just take advantage of them there. And a lot of people see brainwashing techniques that turn them into like mindless zombies. Brainwashing is another thing that we can do an entire episode on, because we
kind of did already.
It is interesting, but it's the more you look into brainwashing techniques, the more you find out that they are not very effective, certainly not long lasting. The other things like the acculturation has way more to do with it than any brainwashing style techniques. Do you know anything about brainwashing stuff?
I should.
Well, you have like classical conditioning, Pavlovian conditioning. If you ring the bell and give them the food, then they'll eventually drool, right? But if you don't continue to reinforce that, then it decays.
It goes away, yeah.
And, so that I would imagine would happen, because you go into a building and you watch a charming slideshow, and then you're converted.
And you get those good feelings.
Right.
So you need to keep having those good
And you start
feelings.
drooling, yes.
Yeah, but it's like the more time that you have available to think and to access, and the more time that you spend in the group, when you're being acculturated to the group, everything's new and fresh and exciting and interesting. But if you've been in the group for a while and things get stagnant and it's like you already know all the stuff, then your mind starts to wander and you start to think about actual things. You start being able to look kind of at the more overarching, the big scheme of the grand scheme of things. And that's the pattern of cults, is that they tend to not keep people for a very long period of time unless they're doing that dial it up kind of thing, and then it reaches a big crescendo where everybody dies, or or they just fall apart.
Yeah, in my case, 24, 25 years of solid indoctrination and being in what is by pretty much all measurements a cult. It's been 2 years and I'm fine. Like, I don't think at all the same way. I don't feel guilty about things. I'm pretty much recovered by now.
Yeah.
Well, I think the big point is that brainwashing isn't just a process that you go through and then it's done. Right? It has to be constant. It has to keep going. This is one of the reasons why they want people to keep coming back to services every week at least, or several times a week, or daily. If you don't have that constant reinforcement, the
effect
that
goes
kind
away.
of stuff is going to start going away.
Much like drugs, right?
Yeah.
And it really, a lot of the tactics that they use have a lot of the same effects on our physiology as drugs do. Like the love bomb. That's basically, a big
Ecstasy.
well,
It's an e-pill.
Yeah, it's basically
a natural high.
It's basically, going to give you a bunch of dopamine in your brain, which makes you feel really fucking good.
Oh, that reminds me. When I was doing DARE as a kid, the definition of drug that the officer said was drug is a non-food substance that alters the way your body works. I'm like, hey,
So hormones.
yeah. So religion is also a drug. Yay! And as we all know, drugs are bad.
And so if you're taking heroin for the caloric intake, it's not a drug. DARE is another one of those, right along, with AA.
Well, what it really is, like the benefits of DARE are not the intended benefits. They still have the program going because they like police interacting with the kids, so they can see that they're also human beings, and then that you can talk to them, that they're not these archetypal figures that you should be scared of. It's like report problems
humanize
to
them.
As far as stopping from doing drugs, it's been totally ineffective.
Yeah, you probably have a better job if you just went in there with McGruff the crime dog and said, like, here's a policeman. Like, because I remember those programs where, they take a bite out of crime, things where the police officers would come there and just talk about, what you can do to prevent crime in your neighborhood, which was, which was a very positive thing, and it was very helpful, and it accomplished the same thing.
Yeah, I learned a very valuable lesson. Whenever there's crimes, I talk to the dog.
McGruff, why are you just sitting there? Why are you just licking your balls? Go stop the crime.
So many sound bites. I love it.
Just stop licking your balls and fix crime.
Yeah. If I learned anything from McGruff.
Step 1, lick balls. Step 2, solve crime.
It's like, solve crimes. I am solving. This is my technique.
It's the crime of who itchied my balls. But anyway, if you know someone that's in a cult, then please do all you can to help them out, and realize that you can't confront these things directly, because then you've become the them of the us v them. But be aware of what they're going through. Study up on it and find ways that you can help them to find their own way out, because you can't pull someone out of a cult. They have to wake up and come out of it themselves.
Yeah, you can't reason someone out of a situation that they didn't reason themselves into, right? Who said that?
I don't know. Someone smart.
Someone a lot smarter than me.
But a lot of these things are emotional and social. So just making sure that they know that you are a backup net for them. That when they come out of that you are there for them. That I think could make a huge difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even the way you helped deconvert me was pretty clever, because I was, full-on churchy dude, and he said, hey, this is a cool podcast I listened to called Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. And I started seeing, humanizing scientists and seeing from that point of view and thinking of the world not inside my little box. And then irreligiosity, and then doing research of myself, and everything it came out.
Yeah, you just have to kind of lead people out of these things, and I mean, that is our main objective, is to pull people out of cults. But our definition of a cult is very, very broad.
Yeah, something that doesn't allow you to think for yourself is immediately my enemy.
Yeah, well, and you get cults of all sorts of things. I mean, that's what groupthink is all about. That you create kind of an ad hoc cult around a certain idea for a small period of time. And even I've been to, skeptic groups where they operate like a cult, that they're very dogmatic, and you're like, wow, no one is immune. Even a group that is formed on the central ideas of the opposite of these things can still become very cult-like.
Let's get ready to fatwa! I guess I'll start. Today, I'm going to declare jihad on American drivers. All of you. Shit, that's me too. Everyone but me. No, there's this phenomenon that seems to be occurring with regularity here in Southern California, where we have these roads that have 2 lanes for each direction. And for some reason, the 2 slowest cars always drive right next to one another. Is it really that hard to speed up like 3 miles an hour for like 10 seconds to pass the guy, so then you can let the 20 cars behind both of you past?
Maybe they're having a nice conversation.
Yes. Same thing with fat people walking down a narrow hallway. Just they always seem to go side by side and just clog up the walkway. Like, hey, dickweeds, there's people behind you waiting.
He's like, hey, clogs.
The difference is you can push fat people.
Hey, you can nudge cars too.
Yeah,
give them a little
expensive.
love tap. Yeah.
Maybe you can get a rubberized bumper, so you can, like a bumper car bumper. Like,
Yeah.
little love tap. Or the love bomb, as we call it. Okay, my fatwa is on this summer that seems like it's never ending. It's so hot all the time and for so long. I just want the cool days to come back.
Yeah, has it been unseasonably warm? Because I
don't know.
I don't know.
It really hasn't.
Fortunately, and I can't believe I'm saying this, fortunately, I've been buried under a mountain of work orders and paperwork. So
I've been inside an AC.
I've been inside all day for the past several weeks. So I haven't melted yet, but
The thing is, I'm a hairy monster, and so I get overheated quite easily.
yeah, that sucks. This week, I'll be declaring jihad on my microwave oven. I guess it works and it's new and I'm sure it does calculus or something amazing, but it always beeps when it's done, regardless of whether or not you've opened the door and pulled out the item you're heating up, and or if you don't have to be in the room when it goes off. It just beeps really loud for a long time, like yeah, got it, thank you, yes, I know it's done, I will get there in a minute. It just keeps going beep, beep. It seems like when you're done with it and you open it, it has no need to alert me that it's done because I'm already there opening the thing up. Fuck you, microwave.
Fuck you and your extension cord. We'd like to thank you for joining us this week on the Church of Awesome. We've been awesome, and I hope you're awesome too. Thanks. We will now leave you with the gift of tongues.
Se trata de un periodo de guerra civil. Naves espaciales rebeldes, atacando desde una base oculta, han ganado su primera victoria contra el mal galáctico imperio. Durante la batalla, los espías rebeldes lograron robar los planes secretos de la arma definitiva del imperio, la Estrella de la Muerte, una estación espacial blindados, con poder suficiente para destruir un planeta entero. Perseguido por siniestros agentes del imperio, la princesa Leia, carreras en la casa a bordo de su nave, el custodio de los planos robados que pueden salvar a la gente. What? Y restablecer la libertad a la galaxia. Sounds like that's a bit wrong.
Well, yeah.
Hey, in the office, we're gonna celebrate diversity today, but not really because we want to be a bunch of homogenized fuckwads.
This is how you get away from that cult and come over to ours. You know?
There's no fighting over dick sizes. Yeah, I learned a very valuable lesson. Whenever there's crimes, I talk to the dog.
The truth should stand up to scrutiny.
I feel like on a first date saying, oh, I still wet the bed.
The comments made by the hosts and other participants are the opinions of the individuals and not those of any corporate entity. All data and information provided in this program is for informational purposes only. The Church of Awesome makes no representations as to accuracy, completeness, currentness, suitability, or validity of any information in this program and will not be liable for any errors, omissions, or delays in this information or any losses, injuries, or damages arising from its display or use. All information is provided on an as-is basis. If you like what you've heard in today's sermon, come visit us at churchofawesome.com or follow us on Twitter at COA Podcast.